Hello, this is Wes Bridle, and this is another Kingdom Calling Economic Update video. It's been almost 3 months, I think, since the last time we shot some videos, so I'm covering a tremendous amount of ground in these videos. There's going to be quite a few. I'm going to do two to begin with on the European crisis, primarily because things are changing there so quickly. I want these to be out there as soon as possible because a week from now there'll probably be a dramatic turn in the story that I didn't know about right now while I'm shooting these. The story really, from a big enough picture, hasn't changed at all. We warned you about the European situation a year and a half ago and told you basically exactly what was going to happen. And so now, a year and a half later, we're here, and it's more and more people are becoming aware of it, but the basic facts haven't changed. But we are going to go through and talk about some things that have kind of popped up in the news and hopefully just kind of tie this all together for you. There's really only a couple ways that this can go. There's probably only one way it can go, but there are a couple possibilities. It's all going to be very ugly. There's no easy way out of this. But let me jump into it. Again, these are all updates on the Coming Storm video that we put out 2 years ago, where we detailed everything that was going to be happening to help you and your family prepare. If you haven't seen that, it's still important because the really big things haven't happened yet. You'll see that we did talk a lot about the things that have happened already in the last 2 years, but it will be important for you to know to prepare for that. It's a free video you can watch from the link that's right near this video. Okay, so getting into the European crisis, there's the rating agencies are all of a sudden downgrading everybody, all the countries in Europe, all the banks, doing that, in the U.S. as well. But that doesn't mean a whole lot because the rating agencies are just slow to figure out what the market already figures out. But it is causing consternation because it sort of puts a final stamp of approval on the fact that they're really in trouble. And it's not just the outer countries, the smaller countries that have obviously taken on a lot of risk, but France is seriously about to lose probably its AAA rating. When I say probably, it's going to happen. But France was considered one of the core countries. Germany, if they end up having to bail everybody out, they're going to lose theirs as well because they can't afford to bail everybody out. So even though they're one of the strongest economies in the world, they can't bail out all of Europe. It's been interesting to see many huge political and economic names across the Europe and the world are finally coming to understand these things that I'm telling you, that I have been telling you for a year and a half. I'm trying to cut down the news because my pile of news over the last 3 months was huge, so I'm not going to go into all of them, but just big name mainstream people giving exactly the same dire warnings that we've been giving you here. Okay, interesting on the bailouts. So in the news a couple weeks ago were the talk of the bailouts, that they were going to increase the size of this EFSF fund, European Stability Maintenance Fund, whatever is the other one. And what they're having to do is they had to have all the countries of the Euro Union agree, and they all had to vote to bail out. It was kind of focused on Greece with the idea that it would also work for other countries like Portugal, certainly not nearly big enough for Spain or Italy, but with that in mind. So here you have countries, and I just happen to read articles, these aren't the only two countries, but countries like Estonia and Slovakia. These countries worked really, really hard to get into the European Union. So they scrimped and saved in order to get their budgets and everything in line in order to be a part of the euro. Now these countries are small and they're poor in compared to most of Europe, and yet this is something they wanted to work hard for, and so they did that. They paid the price, and now they are successful and they're doing pretty well. Well, here Greece comes along. Greece lied and cheated to get into the euro. This is as a culture, obviously certain Greek people are fine and hardworking, but overall as a culture, the people don't want to work very hard. They want someone else to pay their way. They want to retire about age 50 with a nice huge salary. I mean, it's a nice idea. Problem is, it just doesn't work in real life, and that's what's happening. So instead of them kind of dealing with their own situation, all the rest of Europe is having to bail them out so that the whole euro experiment doesn't explode. So here you have these countries who did everything the right way that are poorer than the Greeks. These people have a lot less money than the Greeks. They're having to put in extra money so the Greeks can have these really lush retirements, pensions, union contracts, and all that sort of thing. There was an interesting article. One of the Slovakians leaders was talking about he voted no, and actually Slovakia had a change in power from the more conservative wing went out and the more liberal wing went into their government over this issue, because some of the conservatives said absolutely not, we're not going to bail these people out. The leaders of the conservatives wanted to bail them out, and the liberals voted with them, but they got power in this situation. It's kind of how the parliamentarian system works. But one of the conservative leaders said, how am I supposed to tell people they must pay higher taxes so the Greeks can get pensions 3 times as high as our people get? It's kind of the crux of the issue for a lot of these countries that have done things the right way. Why are we bailing them out? It doesn't make any sense. But that's what's going on in Europe right now. And let's see. Ireland is reportedly printing its own currency again in order to be ready for the euro. You're seeing a bunch of signs, and we've been talking about this for a while, but now you're seeing a bunch of signs in the media that different people are preparing for the euro to explode. So apparently, we reported last time in our videos that there were rumors that Germany and France were printing their own currencies to go back to the Deutschmark and the franc, and that now Ireland, is it the Bund? I don't remember, but Ireland's currency, apparently they're getting ready. So everyone's seeing it. I've got it in a note. I don't know if it's this one or the next video, but Switzerland also is preparing for the euro to implode. A lot of international, multinational companies within Europe are preparing for this. Everyone's preparing for this because it looks inevitable. And of course, it's going to be so devastating that even if it's maybe not going to happen, you better have a plan in place for it. And this goes for America too, because the repercussions of euro imploding is going to be very much felt worldwide. Okay, the current Chancellor Osborne recently said QE was the last resort of a desperate government. So this is in England. He said quantitative easing was the last resort of a desperate government, I don't know, a couple months back. And last month, Bank of England reported that they're doing more QE. So they're desperate. The one thing I don't have too much of a problem with about that is Mervyn King, the governor of the Bank of England, has been very, very honest. He's the most honest one that I've seen anywhere about the major problems the world and England are facing. So at least, I mean, they're the most honest of them. And let's see, this is interesting because this comes to the crux of the problem in Europe. Greece had budget austerity cuts over the last year. This problem's been around for a while. And so in order for Europe to bail them out, they said, you got to cut your budget. So they did. They've made some pretty big cuts. The problem is, because the socialism is so huge in that country, and in many countries, when they cut back on their budget, it means it puts a huge dent on the productivity or the incomes of the people, and so the taxes to the government is less. So they have this big deficit problem where they're spending more than they're bringing in taxes, but when they cut their spending, it makes the taxes go down. And so that's what we've seen in Greece. It just came out that their deficit increased by 15%, even though they reduced their budget. It's a serious problem. There's no real way out of this. This whole system has to be washed out because it's not sustainable to continue spending so much more than you make, and yet the only other option is you really dramatically cut what you're spending, and that's going to hurt taxes in the short run. In the long run, that's good. It flushes people out. It gets people doing actually real productive work, because when they work for the government, nothing's being produced. But it's going to take some time to wash that out. There's it could printing the ECB, the European Central Bank, could print their way out just like the U.S. has been doing. Not that we've solved our problems, and it certainly would danger the value of their currency, but it is something that could be done that would help alleviate the situation a little bit. Germany, which kind of controls the ECB, is totally against that and not willing to let that happen. In the end, they probably will print when things get really ugly, but that's kind of the situation that we're in. 25 of the 27 nations of Europe are in violation of rules on debts and or deficits. So how are they going to bail each other out? They're talking about bailing each other out. They're almost all in too much debt. So there's no one to bail anyone out. The German bond auctions have failed recently, and which means they haven't been able to raise as much money for the German government as they would like to have raised. So it's a huge indicator that even the so-called huge, strong German government isn't as strong as it should be. And now countries like Sweden, Norway, Switzerland that are outside the euro area are being looked at as stronger than Germany, even though they don't have as strong of an economy as Germany. They're not tied to all these peripheral European countries, and so the market says, I'd rather deal with a simpler situation. Europe, some of the European leaders have wanted to ban rating agencies from rating sovereign debt, which is highly hysterical. 3 years ago, everyone was complaining that the rating agencies were too slow to change ratings. They had AAA ratings on things that went bankrupt, and so everyone was outraged that these rating agencies had such bad ratings. The ratings were too high. Well, now the rating agencies, I mean, they're way slower than we've been talking, but at least they're coming around before some of these things blow up and saying, hey, we've got to reduce ratings, and now they're mad at them for doing that, so they can't win. The reality is politicians they've got to blame somebody for the issues that they've created over these years. It's kind of like Argentina. Argentina, if you haven't heard, in the last several months, has made it kind of, I don't know, illegal, or I guess illegal. You get fined or thrown in jail, I don't know what, for using the word inflation in the media. You can't use that word. They can only have their set numbers, and you're not allowed to talk about inflation. It's ridiculous. People on the street know there's inflation. They see the things that cost more and more all the time. It's ridiculous that politicians can think that they can change anything by doing this, but that's what politicians do. So, France, close to being downgraded. I think I already covered that. And let's see, 74% of CDS, the credit default swaps, trading worldwide are between 20 dealer banks. So an interesting study came out. 5 of these banks are US. So there's potentially massive implosion. These credit default swaps, there's trillions of dollars worth, and no one really knows actually. There's 600 trillion total of derivatives, somebody's estimated, which is way too big number for anyone to be able to afford to pay off. A lot of these are credit default swaps on the sovereign debt of these countries. Some of these countries are going to go under, maybe many of them, and these banks are on the hook for this. They've written insurance that there's no way they can actually pay out. They haven't really underwritten anything. They just made a bet. And so it's really ironic that the countries need to bail out the banks, but the banks are going to go under because of the countries, and it's all tied together. It's a big, ugly debt ball that is going to go up in flames. I mean, the countries can't afford to bail out the banks because of the massive. In Europe, the banks are 4 times bigger than the United States, and they just have massive, massive risk. Countries can't really afford to bail them out without just printing money. It's really the only way out. Of course, that leads to massive inflation. That's where we are with this. Governments will bail out European banks, which might save the U.S. banks. So, but will it happen? I'm just kind of alluding to that. The U.S. banks are in danger because if those banks start going down, the U.S. banks are going to start going down too. The U.S. banks, and there's something like, I think I saw a number of $74 trillion of derivatives that Merrill Lynch, Bank of America have, and I don't know if that was all European stuff or probably just a lot of it, but they can't. That number is 5 times bigger than the whole United States economy. They can't take a massive loss in that area. No one really knows what their risk exposure is, but even a decent percentage loss would wipe out any company, any country. And so these U.S. companies, and they're not the only U.S. company, I think J.P. Morgan has a very similar exposure. They're betting that the governments in those European countries are going to bail them out. It's just a high-risk bet. If those Germany remembers what happened in the 1920s when they started doing that sort of thing. They started just printing money on demand, and it was worse than any Great Depression. And so it's unclear how it's going to go. There probably is going to be more bailing out and money printing, but the U.S. banking system may go down first. I really don't know. It's pretty interesting to watch this. I think I'm going to start actually my video, because this one's run long, on a conversation I was having with a friend recently that just popped into my mind as I was talking about that. If you haven't watched the Coming Storm video, I recommend you do that. Thank you for watching this, and God bless you.